Hi, I'm Nancy. Welcome to video 2, featuring a watercolor painting of the common zinnia, a great butterfly attracting plant for your summer flower garden. The sketch of the zinnia has already been transferred to the watercolor paper, and I'm ready to paint. Details on how I did this transfer are described in video 1. This video is the first of 4 painting demonstrations in this series. Because this is the first video, I go into great detail on everything that I'm doing and why. As a result, this video is lengthier than the next 3 videos. With that said, let's get started. Before I start painting, I like to get in the habit of dusting off my painting in case there's any debris or lint on there. And another thing that is optional, you don't have to do this. I could show you how to get around that if you don't want to do this, but I'm going to show you how to put some masking fluid on your painting. This particular one, I had some masking fluid that was applied in the middle of the disc on this bloom. And the reason I do that is it would be very hard to paint around all the individual little areas that I want to leave white. So I'm going to apply some of this that dries like a rubber, and we can remove it later and you'll have some white spots left, but you can paint right over it. So I usually wet the brush a little bit with some water. This is the jar of masking fluid. I'm just going to make some dots in the middle of this disc. And this will be optional. You don't have to do this. Just some random dots in between these little blooms that are in the middle of this bloom here. That's probably enough. You can always paint over them if you don't like them in the end. You can paint over the white that's left. Now I have to leave this on and let it dry for about 30 minutes. So we'll come back and then we'll actually start the painting. I usually try to rinse it off as fast as I can, and I'm using an older brush when I do this because it will gum up the brush. You definitely don't want to do this with your nice brushes. So I'm just using an old brush. Some people use a toothpick or a stick, whatever you want, but it is very convenient. A lot of watercolorists may not want to use masking fluid because it's sort of like cheating. But when you want to save some white on the paper, it's a nice, easy way to do it. And then it is removed later, and you can do whatever you want with that white. But you don't have to worry about, you can paint right over it and don't have to worry about painting around it. So that's one thing that I mentioned in the book on an option is to put some masking fluid down on this. So I wanted to show you how that's done. And we'll let it dry for about 30 minutes. Okay, I'm ready to begin painting. I'll give this one final brush. I've mixed up some various tones of pink. I've mixed up some shell pink and alizarin crimson, and I've also mixed up a little bit of a shadow color. It's got a little bit of a violet mixed in with it. And we're going to start with the petals, and I'm going to skip around because I don't want to put any wet ones next to each other because the paint will run together. To give myself more time, this is a tip for you if you're just starting out and the paint dries on you before you get a section done. This will help you if you wet the paper first with plain water. So I'm going to just start with one of these up at the top. Also, the light is coming in from my left. So that means that these areas here, these petals and underneath these petals are going to be showing shadows, which are going to have some darker areas. In fact, these petals on the outer edge are going to be a lot darker. The whole petal is going to be a lot darker because the light is coming in from this direction. So we'll start, these petals up here are pretty light. So we'll start with that. I'm going to wet it first. You might consider, if you are left-handed, to work this way. I always seem to work from the left to the right because I'm right-handed. That way I don't end up putting my hand on any wet paint. So I am just putting some plain water on here, kind of prime the paper. I call it priming the paper. There's kind of a starchy feel to it. It's got a sizing on it, and that helps also to break that up. So I've got that one wet, and I'm going to get my light pink. And I try to start, you see how it spreads because it's already wet. If you'll notice, it's darker toward the center. I'm going to paint around these little yellow florets in the middle of this disc. Just for the sake of simplicity, I am calling these petals, but they're actually florets. But I'm not going to get too botanical right now. I'm just going to call them petals. So I'm going to be darker here toward the center, and then I still have paint on my brush, so I'm just going to sweep across the top, make that a little bit lighter, let that go a little lighter, darker toward the center. Just let it dry. It will spread out some on its own, fill in on its own a little bit. Okay, I'm going to, and even if there's some light spots, that's what makes it interesting looking. There's a little light spot right here. I'm just going to leave that. See how it, that's the nice thing about watercolor. Just see how it turns out. All right, I'm going to have to rinse my brush. And you don't have to rinse it completely every time. You'll notice I have a paper towel down here. It's just a habit that I've gotten into because I have a habit of putting my hand down, which is probably not a great idea. And I don't want to put any oil from my hand onto the paper. So I just put a paper towel down. That helps me. I don't always put my hand down, but these days I do it more often. So you may have to turn, that's why I like this block. You can just turn the whole block around, and I'm going to skip over and do one of these so they're not touching each other. I'll wait for that to dry before I come and do these next to it. And I'll show you real quick. I have a reference photo that I'm looking at, and I'll just show you. I have a little computer right here that has my reference photo on it, and so I glance at that every once in a while. And I also have the finished painting over here to my right, where I can just check and make sure that I'm getting the colors correct. So let's keep going. I'll do this one here. These are all pretty light right here. I could go a little bit lighter. I'll go ahead and wet that. You just work your way around. I'll go ahead and wet both these. I would recommend that you do one at a time. That way you can keep the paper wet and it won't dry out on you. This helps you if you're a little slow starting out and you want to make sure you don't want it to dry on you. It buys you more time. You can use whatever brush you feel most comfortable with. I use different brushes. I sort of favor the flat brushes, which is not typical of most watercolor painters. Now I want that to be real light, and I'm going to just wait on that for a minute. I'm going to use some of this paint up here on this one. Try to work as fast as you can. Don't get too stressed about it. Now, see, this one is going to be real light. I like to vary the shades on each petal as well. It's just more interesting to look at. Now that I have most of the paint off of this one, I'll come back and just finish this one off. You see how I made that a lot lighter up the top? I just brought some of that paint up forward. I'm going to darken this just a little bit. I'm going right over this little mark right here. That's going to be a future leaf spot. Zinnias have so many problems especially in the South, they have a lot of leaf spot problems. You won't ever see one at the end of summer that doesn't have leaf spots on it. So I thought it would be fun to show you how to do that. Make it look realistic. Now it's a little dark right there, so what you can do, just rinse your brush, wipe off the excess moisture, it's called a thirsty brush, and just lift that up a little bit, spread it out. Okay. So that one's nice and light. So I'm going to work my way around. I'm going to go to this one right here. This one is pretty light also. This one has a leaf spot on it too. And you know, this is kind of another tip, I guess. You could leave a little pink on your brush. You can see it's light right here, and that way I'll know, did I wet that first or not? I can see a faint pink on it, so I know that I did wet it. It's wet with water. So you don't have to rinse it out completely. Remember that watercolor paint will dry about 20 to 30% lighter than when you apply it. So always apply it a little bit darker than you want. When it dries, it will lighten up on you. So keep that in mind. And bring that out just a little bit. So these are already, that one's pretty nice and dark. This one's pretty light. That's good. I'll make this one darker when I come back around. This one here has a little shadow on it. I didn't indicate that on the sketch, but not a problem. When you do these, you will have the sketch provided. It will be in your book, and also the complete written instructions and the paint palette that I used. And this is all in a companion book that goes with the video series. Now, you'll notice I did not wet this first with water. When you have a smaller area, you really don't have to, unless you just want to. It also helps even out your wash, but it's not critically important that this wash be nice and even. It's actually more interesting to look at when it's not totally even. This one has some shadow underneath it, so I'll show you right now while it's wet so you can get a good soft edge on it. Alright, I'm going to take, I have a little bit darker mix over here, and just these underneath these petals. You see it's still wet, so that I can just dab it on there and it kind of spreads itself. I like that. And it's a little bit darker because it's underneath that other petal. Now it's spreading a little bit too much because I like to work on a slant, so it's coming down a little bit too far, so I can just lift it up with my thirsty brush. And I can come back later and add more. You see I didn't go all the way to the edge there, so let me go ahead and do that. My paintings are not known to be very loose. I work on that, but my style is basically pretty detailed. Almost to the point of being a botanical illustrator, but I've decided that's my style, and I'm just gonna go with it. I want it to be a little darker here, so I'm taking some of this darker mix right here. That just has a little bit of the violet. You could, if you're working with just 3 colors, you can mix a little bit of ultramarine blue with this mix to get the darker mix for your shadows. In fact, I probably did that on my original painting. I just do different things. One thing I like to do too, because sometimes you can't sit for hours and just paint without interruptions, so I can never remember what I mixed up before. Even a couple hours before, I can't remember exactly what I mixed up. So what I like to do is make a little record for myself. And this record, I just put down all the colors that I use in that painting, and sometimes I come back and I paint it again for whatever reason. And I come back, I want to paint it again, so I know exactly what colors that I used, and it saves me some time trying to experiment with all the mixtures. So I keep a record on everything that I do like that. My mother was a librarian, so she kind of instilled in me to be super organized. So sometimes I'm a little too organized, but it helps. It helps me anyway. So. Okay, so let's keep moving around. By this time, this one over here should be dry, so we come back around, we can go ahead. I need to probably speed it up a little bit. If you add water to this, you have to be careful, because sometimes if you add water to the mix, you will get a bloom or a run. They call them different things. And there's almost every watercolor painting that you look at will have some run in it at some point. And that's what makes watercolor interesting. See, I'm going to leave that there. It's kind of unusual. And so you can try your best to not have runs, or you can leave them in there. It doesn't really matter. That's what's kind of fun, and no stress about watercolor. Just whatever it wants to do. You can, once you know how it's going to act on the paper, then you can control it. If you want it to go crazy on you, that's great. You know what it's going to do. And if you want to control it more, you'll know how to control it. This is a pretty color pink. It's a alizarin crimson mixed with some shell pink, which is an unusual color. The shell pink is not a transparent, it's very opaque. It's kind of chalky, so it gives you a thicker appearance. I don't know how often it's used. What you can do if you're only working with 3 colors, I recommend it if you're on a budget and you're not sure if you're going to like watercolor and you don't want to make a huge investment to start with. You can start with just 3 colors. You know, the basic color wheel that they talked about years ago that you probably heard about. You can take your alizarin crimson, I recommended that, and an ultramarine blue, and a yellow, maybe Gamboge. And you can get everything you need for this painting with those 3 colors if you want to. You can just take the alizarin crimson and add a lot of water to it, make a light pink, and you'd be okay with that. But I'm showing you what can be done. Now this one has a shadow on it. You see these dotted lines right here. You may not be able to see them very well anymore, but there were some dotted lines on that sketch. I'm going to go ahead and put that in there while it's wet and get a soft edge on it. I can do it after, but you'll have a hard edge there. It doesn't make it look as natural. Okay. Coming around, get some of these on either side of this original one that we did. This one is very light right here. I'm not even, well, I'm just going to get a very dilute mix here. Part of it is behind, so maybe later I'll put a little sliver of dark right there because it is behind the other petal. And let's see where we are. I might make this one a little darker though, I'll make the top part light, the bottom part I'll darken it a little bit. I'm going to rinse some of that out. Just bring this out to the edge. The top part is real light. I'm going to take a smaller brush and just line right behind there, darker. Make a dark line right there. Okay, it's still wet, so it'll run. Alright, just moving around here. This one is pretty dark. Don't worry if you go over the lines a little bit. believe it or not, I am working maybe a little faster than I normally do, so I'm going over the lines a little bit. But that's okay, you can smooth it out later. There are a lot of people think you can't correct watercolor, but there's plenty of ways you can do that. On some of these tight spaces, though, I may consider using a smaller brush. I'm just gonna make this a little darker. Down in there. Every one that you do will be a little different, and that's kind of neat. Every painting, if you do these more than once, each one will come out looking a little different. I do have a line right here. You probably can't see it, but that means it's pretty dark down in here, so I will come back and darken that. What I'm going to do now, I think I've pretty much said everything I need to say as far as instructions, so I may stop, finish this around here. I will do one of these darker ones so you can see that, and that way you don't have to, you know, you can work on your own painting, and I'll come back when all the petals are finished. It's okay if I go over the line a little bit there, because we'll come back, and once you get the background in, it'll all go together pretty well. I can even lift some of that, see I'm way over the line right there. That's okay. Sometimes I like to wait until it dries because it lifts a lot easier. Let me show you. I have a wet brush. I'm going to wipe off the extra so it's moist. I'm going to run it right along there and lift that up. But when it's wet, it may just continue to spread back in. So sometimes it's best to wait till it dries. Okay, let me do one of these dark ones, and then I'll finish going around here. Or I can do that later. I could go ahead and lay some yellow down in the middle. Let's see, let's do this one back here is really dark. Go ahead and do that one. So that's the idea. You've seen how we soften the edges. You've also seen the contrast between the dark and the light. This whole petal back here is receding in the background, so it's going to be a lot darker than these over on this side. Okay. And, you know, if it's still not dark enough to your liking, you can always come back and put another layer on it. I would recommend do that after it dries. Come back and put another layer on there until it's as dark as you like. Okay? I'll go ahead, since I have a little bit of a space right here where it's not wet, I'll go ahead and put the yellow in these little florets in the center. We're going to use a color called Gamboge. And I'm going to go to a much smaller brush. And I may dull that down just a little bit because they are sort of a brownish yellow. Let me see, some yellow ochre here. Alright. I'm just going to do, I may need a bigger brush here. This is still wet, but I think it'll be alright. Let's go ahead and get some yellow in these flowers in the center. You can paint right over the little circle in the middle because that's going to be a darker color. My sketch is pretty light. You may want to make sure yours might be a little darker, but since I'm sort of familiar with this sketch, then I'm not going to worry too much about it. But with the lights and all, it's hard to see it. You get the idea. Just go ahead and put all your yellow in here. We'll let those dry and we'll come back in a few minutes. We will continue with the zinnia painting in Lesson 2, Part 2.